Welcome to episode 361 of the DFO Rundown, presented by Bet365. Download the app today and use the promo code NATION, N-A-T-I-O-N, to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365 as the NHL regular season returns. And man, it's going to be a sprint to the end of the regular season. We are 11 days away from the NHL trade deadline. There's lots to get to. I'm Jason Gregor as we welcome in Frank Saravalli. And Frank, quick little recap on the Four Nations, because there's some injury news, I think, that connect with it. But overall, definitely a success, I think, for the league. Lots of eyeballs on the games. The games were very intense. And you know what? Hard to find a negative, really, in this tournament.
Yeah, super compelling product. Two fantastic host cities. First-class event all the way around, and you saw complete and total buy-in from the players both on and off the ice. It wasn't just the fact that they had the intensity in their games. It was also that media access was fantastic. The behind-the-scenes stuff that they did that we'll see in future weeks and months was probably really powerful. Even some of the mic'd-up moments on the bench that we've seen kind of leak out in the last couple days since the championship game, it's great content. So they were all in, and the league was all in on their end and putting this on and staging it. It's a really expensive tournament to run, and they were willing to pause their season for 12 days in order to make it happen. Now, the cynic in me would say, where has this been for the last 11 years, and why did you only just come around to it now? But better to have it than to not have it at all.
Yeah, it's a fair question. What took so long? But thankfully, it's here, and we know that it's going to be here for the next, next few cycles at least. I don't see any reason for it to go away. The injuries potentially leads us into trade deadline, of course, because there's lots to talk about there. But we'll start with, Shea Theodore's got the broken wrist. We know he's out for some time. Brady Tkachuk, probably the least injured of the guys who are injured, should be back soon. There were some reports about Matthew Tkachuk, but Paul Maurice said, no, he's playing for us, but he didn't get a timeline. What do you think the timeline is on Matthew Tkachuk?
Well, that's because they don't have a timeline yet. Look, it's abundantly clear that this is a soft tissue injury. Whether it's a groin or hamstring, couldn't decipher between the two based on how Matthew Tkachuk kept trying it out. But he tried to push through it, tried to heal up in the days between the Saturday game against Canada and then the Thursday final. And then obviously more pain in the championship game and had to ultimately sit out. So he's having more imaging being done on Monday today. The Panthers will get a more exact or precise timeline, but whether it's, in Paul Maurice's words, shorter or longer term, the fact of the matter is it doesn't typically take you 7-8 weeks to come back from one of those injuries. We'll see. I mean, we don't know the full severity of it, but I would expect to see Matthew Tkachuk again in the regular season.
What did you make of the Charlie McAvoy situation? It's rare a team comes out and posts as in depth of a medical breakdown of the injury and the timeline. To me, it was pretty obvious. It was, he was injured in the first game and then they let him play. What did you make of that?
It's so hypocritical, I thought, of Don Sweeney and the Boston Bruins. First off, let's remember everyone's role here. Don Sweeney was also the general manager for Team Canada in this tournament. Was he shielding Sidney Crosby from playing in those games with his injury coming into the tournament? I don't think so. The backstory here and the true story is that Charlie McAvoy suffered an AC joint injury in the game against Finland on Thursday.
Goes to hammered from behind into the goalpost.
Right. Goes to suit up for the USA on Saturday. And before the game, like so many players do throughout the playoffs, gets an injection to help manage the pain. I was just happened to run into a former NHL player in the press box in TD Garden at Four Nations who said, I used to get shot up in my foot so many times that sometimes they would do it twice a game. So this is a normal everyday occurrence in the NHL. That's what happens is players. And if you want to have a larger discussion after the fact about these injections and Toradol and everything else that's going into their body, we can have that discussion at some point, and we'll save that for a summer episode. But nonetheless, got the injection, and that's where the infection came from, is from the injection.
Yeah.
So normal course of action, and then you see the Bruins throw shade and allow you to read between the lines in their statements, which is, I think, way over the top. Is anyone actually alleging here that Team USA doctors are putting their own player at risk based on a normal course of action for an injury and an injection? Look, I don't know what happened with the injection. No one does. But seems to me, just as a bystander, that a freak thing happened. An infection stemmed from an injection that every player gets throughout the course of a season. Something odd happened, okay? To think that you're going to lay it out there for all to see publicly that and throw shade at the Team USA doctor, who also happens to be the Minnesota Wild doctor, I think is poor form, to be honest. And then let alone who it's coming from, as if, you know, they weren't doing the same thing in their dressing room with their players.
Yeah. Well, the infection is definitely right. We could have a whole conversation about, the Toradol factor, and I'm sure that's something down the line. You would need a good science expert to talk about that one. But I just found it kind of odd, and I was kind of like, when it comes out, you don't see that very often, and usually it comes out like that when they're trying to throw shade on someone else, right? Because if it had happened under their watch, it definitely wouldn't have come out.
We would have never heard about it, first off, and it would have been kept super tight and quiet. That's
just would have been he has a shoulder injury.
But look, it was unfortunate all the way around. So the U.S. and Canada both flew to Boston after the game on Saturday night. They were stuck on the tarmac for hours. They didn't get to their hotels until 6 a.m. on Sunday. McAvoy wakes up with pain in his shoulder thinking, hey, this is just the AC joint injury and I'm super tired and at some point I'll sleep it off. Is uncomfortable all day Sunday, and then at some point on Monday is like, hey, look, this is probably abnormal. I need to go see someone. And that's when this was all uncovered. But he didn't know, and anyone else didn't know, that there was something going on with an infection. And by then, the infection was just too big, too late. There was fluid, everything else that was involved in building up in his shoulder, that they actually had to go in and scrape it out and flush it out, which the Bruins also alluded to. That's going to keep him out actually longer than the AC joint injury would. And had he just had the AC joint injury, as we could, tell by the two massive hits that he threw on Connor McDavid in the first period of that Saturday game, the AC joint injury alone, he would have played on Thursday's championship game. That's not what would have kept him out, and it wouldn't have likely kept him out from playing for the Boston Bruins. So I don't know what they're alleging. I think it's poor form and BS that they would do it, but nonetheless, that's where we are.
Now, we are 11 days away from NHL trade deadline. And, let's start with the Boston Bruins just because we were right there. Charlie McAvoy injury, who knows, doesn't seem like it's long-term, but it might be a few weeks. So who knows if he'll be back before the NHL trade deadline or not. They currently are outside of the playoff position, albeit by 1 point. It's not like they're a long ways out by any stretch, Frank. But what's your sense of the Bruins and what they are going to do or not do between now and the deadline?
Well, Don Sweeney held a media availability over the weekend, and I don't think you could go as far as saying that he waved the white flag, but he certainly opened the door to the idea that the Bruins will be moving out pieces. So you've got the McAvoy injury on one hand, and on the other, you've got Hampus Lindholm done for the season, fractured kneecap.
Yeah.
So an uncomfortable position to be in. And, oh, by the way, your captain and your second best player, arguably, or third, in Brad Marchand, needs a new contract and is a pending UFA. What do you do? He said again that in his vision and his world, he sees the Bruins getting a deal done with Marchand, but also acknowledged the idea that it could come to a point where they have to move him. So the Bruins are undoubtedly one of the fascinating teams to watch between now and next Friday. They've got some of the smaller end pieces, bottom six pieces that I think could really help your team. Trent Frederick, Justin Brazeau. Do they consider moving one of their other larger term contracts? And then there's the Marchand question. So a lot of people have taken a fascinating view on the Bruins. They say, look at this team, look at some of the bad contracts that they have. They need to blow this up. I look at it and say, this is a team that was victimized by goaltending and poor performance this year. I mean, Jeremy Swayman, if he gets anywhere close to his career numbers, this team is a firm playoff team. I believe that. I'm not saying that there aren't elements of this team to fix. Obviously, the center position is humongous, and I'm not pinning it all on Swayman, but look at their success the last few years in the regular season. It's on the back of their goaltending. His career save percentage is .914 in 173 games. That includes the .898 that he has in 41 games this year. It's just .898 is not playoff goaltending. It just isn't.
Yeah, they don't have enough offense, Frank. They got two guys with more than 34 points. They're 24th in offense. Like, you got Pasternak, and then you got Marchand, who turns 37 in May. I think, to me, the major concern in Boston is, you know what? They're going into a gunfight with a butter knife most nights. And if the other team finds a way to contain David Pasternak, and to a lesser extent Marchand, you got nothing, right? Like, two guys with over 34 points. It's just, you're not going to win. They're 24th in offense. And you're right that, you know, Swayman's numbers are down, but they give up a lot and they don't score a lot. And it's not a great combination where you have to, you know, I think we saw it with the Jets. If you're really good defensively, if you can't score when it matters, you're not going to win in today's NHL. And I look at the Bruins, and I'm curious what they do offensively, because it's not like they have, you know, they got a few young guys maybe, but let's be honest, if, you know, what's the reality of those young guys, you know, popping right away, right? I think it takes some time for the majority of young players. So I'm very curious to see what they do. And Brad Marchand, you know, he's a career Bruin. Great personality. He's an unreal guy when it comes to off of the ice, shows personality, competes really hard, does all those things. But I wonder, if you're the Bruins and if you can get some pieces, do you contemplate moving him?
I would just want to quibble with one part of your analysis, though. They struggled to score the same exact amount last year. Last year, they averaged 3.21 goals per game. This year, they have 3.17. It's the exact same. Okay.
No, they're 2.74, man. The Bruins. 2.74.
It says here on Hockey Reference that they have 2.74. Okay.
And 2.74.
So then I'm looking at the two previous years, 3.17 and 3.21.
Yeah.
So there's been a half a game drop.
Half a goal a game. The other thing is, Kevin Woodley's outlined a lot. He said even last year, he goes, the environment in front of their goaltending wasn't great. They had great goaltending.
They covered up a lot of their issues.
Exactly.
The last couple. That was my thought process, was maybe this team has been very similar the last few years, and maybe their goaltending just covered up a lot of their ailments.
Yeah. And if you rely on that too long, eventually the house of cards is going to fall down. So they're a fascinating team to me. Like Trent Frederick, I'll say this about Trent Frederick. Man, I think a lot of teams would be interested in him, Frank. There's just not a lot of guys who've got some offensive punch, who play with grit in today's game. Now, Brazeau's a huge body, man. He's a dirt cheap contract right now. If you're the Bruins, that's a guy I'd rather keep, because I don't know if you're going to get that much to make it worthwhile to trade him.
I could see that for sure.
Right? Like, I would keep him if I was them. So they're a team to watch. What about the Panthers, Frank? We know we've talked about it. Like, I think they'd love to upgrade their defense. You know, you think about, they really haven't replaced Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Montour from last year as far as quality guys go. They don't have any cap space, though. And, you know, the Tkachuk injury, you could put him on LTIR, but if they feel he's going to come back before the end of the season, well, that doesn't really help them. What about the Panthers? And do you see Bill Zito being a cap, you know, them finding some unique ways to bring in some defensemen?
Well, they always find a way. My bigger question would be, how much of an impact piece will they be? Because it's not just the cap space. They also don't have assets. They've got
No.
nothing to trade. They don't have a first, second, or third round pick this year. And their first round pick was involved for 2026, was involved in a trade going back a couple years ago. They don't have a third in 2026. They've basically got a second and then a second in 2026 and all their picks in 2027. It's not enough. So unless you're going to get super creative and say, we're going to go trade Spencer Knight, or we're going to pick another piece off of their roster, which I don't know would help them, you're scraping that, the old line is, shopping for Gucci on a Walmart budget. Like I don't know if that's going to work.
Yeah, it's fair.
I just think that at some point too, if you are going to pull the trigger and maybe the Spencer Knight deal makes sense to move at some point because you're devoting $4.5 million to your backup for next year as well. But Knight's been pretty good, and it would seem that what you've invested in him to this point, not just the money, but also the draft capital, at 23, he turns 24 in April. Maybe he's your goalie of the future.
I was just going to say, like, you look at Bobrovsky's contract and stuff, and the changing of the guard there could be quite seamless if they wanted to, and I think that would be their plan. Obviously, they probably thought it would come to fruition earlier by paying him that much money, but Bobrovsky's been quite good for them the last few seasons. So, but eventually, H catches up with everybody, and you trade him, and then they're going to be looking, geez, we need to replace him for Bobrovsky, right? That's the risk.
Bobrovsky turns 37. He'll be 37 and a half when his deal's up. So obviously on hole 16 of his career, although he's one of those guys in great shape that I could see playing for a while, but not at that cap hit. And the other thing Florida's going to have to ask themselves is, we went to a cup final, we won the cup. How much can we push it every year before at some point 5 years from now, we're really going to have a ton of pain? And they may already be getting close to that number anyway.
Now, the biggest story, Frank, 11 days out, still is the Carolina Hurricanes. You've been talking about it for a few weeks. The Mikko Rantanen, they don't have a contract, and the closer you get to the trade deadline, all of a sudden they say, hey, we can't basically give away Natchez and Drury for 3 months and have nothing else. Like, what's the latest that you're hearing on Mikko Rantanen?
Well, I think everyone's trying to remain patient and calm. That the Canes, and they know that they feel like they've put their best foot forward so far in both how they've treated Rantanen since he got there, to allowing him to get introduced to the market. I mean, that's the other part of this. What did he have, like 10 days in town before leaving for the Four Nations break? So not even really able to get settled, probably still living out of a hotel. So it hasn't been easy, but they've taken their time. They didn't want to put the full court pressure on the day after the trade. They wanted him to go in eyes wide open with what he's looking at, because this is a major commitment. At the end of the day, my concern is, or question I should say, would be, how does Tom Dundon, the Canes owner, feel about this? Because that matters more than anything else. And I think I'd be concerned if I were the Hurricanes about two things. One, on paper, regardless of whatever the eye test or the underlying numbers say, on paper, Rantanen's production is way down.
Yeah.
How does the owner feel about committing major dollars to that? And two, is the owner willing to roll the dice, to your point, on the back end of this and potentially have him walk for nothing on July 1? I really have a lot of hesitancy to say that he'll be comfortable with that on the back end. Meaning, oh yeah, no problem. We traded those assets for this guy and one playoff run. If he's not committing, I'm not a believer that Tom Dundon loves that idea, just based on what I know of the situation. So no. I would lean toward, if you've truly put the dollars on the table and you've put what you believe is a fair 8-year deal on the table, and he's not committing to you or is non-committal, my money would be on them flipping him. But that's just me. That's just a hunch and a bet. That's no inside intel.
Well, that would be, I'm trying to think of a situation in NHL history involving a top end player and a scenario like that. Like, it would be wild when you think about it, Frank. Like, wild that you acquire this guy, give up decent assets to get him, and then you got to flip him less than 2 months later because you can't agree to a contract. It's, it would make for great theater. And all of a sudden, I think there's lots of teams, because there's some teams out there potentially with more space than they thought. And Mikko Rantanen,
he's already been retained half. That's one thing to keep in mind. He's only at 4.7.
Right. Well, but here's exactly. So the team acquiring him doesn't necessarily have to do it to retain him, because, but the thing is, if Carolina, if they can't sign him, do other teams, well, geez, we're not going to give you very much because we're not sure we're going to be able to sign him. Maybe this guy just wants to test the market and see what he's worth.
And if that does come to pass, then at that point I'd assume Carolina would just keep him for the run.
Right. Yeah. So he's a fascinating piece that he's still kind of involved in the potential trade talks around the league. It's an interesting one. Now there's a few other teams here.
Well, I was just going to say quickly too, like, it is interesting to me that when you go to Natural Stat Trick and you pull up his numbers from this season, his expected goals for per 60 minutes is actually better than it was in Colorado. There's not going in.
Yeah. But isn't Carolina's always been a high expected goals? Have they not, as a group? Or maybe I'm wrong there, but
I don't know.
I don't know. Expected goals are great, but I don't know.
I agree. It's goals that hit the back of the net, but at some point you have to say, is this a bad 6-game run, or is it more than that? Is it?
Hey, we've seen players take time to adjust. It's his first time ever traded mid-season, right? Like, there's lots of stuff to
time
deal
playing
with
in the East. I mean, there's a million factors.
There's lots of factors for sure. Well, and then, like, look at Colorado. I know they had the one big game before the break, but they come out and they look like a pop gun offense all of a sudden. 2 goals in 2 games for them.
Their numbers were way down as a team.
Yes, way down. Well, Nathan McKinnon, how about this on the weekend? Only the second time this season he's gone consecutive games without a point. The first time was back in November when they played Tampa and Vegas, pretty good teams. But this weekend was St. Louis and Nashville, 2 non-playoff teams, and he didn't get a point, which is rare.
Yeah.
The New Jersey Devils. Pardon?
What would you do if you're Carolina?
I don't think you can risk losing him for nothing, but you can also say, is this, he's going to play 12 games total? I think they got 6 more, maybe 5 left. So 11 games. Like, is that enough for him to really feel comfortable? I'd probably, if I'm Tom Dundon, who's obviously, been pretty successful at times, you've got to, you can't be afraid to take a risk to have success. And I think the one thing Carolina has always lacked really, and during this tenure, is a dominant offensive guy. Now, in 11 games, if he continues and he's only got 7 points or 4 points, you're like, geez, maybe it doesn't work. But I'd also say that's probably not a big enough sample size. If I'm close, Frank, and, I offered him, 13.5 million, right? Would I go 14? Probably. If I'm going 13.5, I'm going 14. Like, I don't see it, being that much of a difference. I might play the long game here.
That's not how Carolina works. And that was their big fault and failure with Jake Gensel. Had they come out of the gate in March and given him 8 times 8, my guess is he would have just signed.
Right.
But they waited and they goofed around and they chiseled. And it was just like, at some point it was like enough. And then the last week before free agency put on the full court pressure. And by that point it was too late. He's like, I'm already this close to market. I'm just going to go.
Yeah. So if they've learned from that and made a respectful, legitimate offer already, right, of 8 times 13, at least it's showing the Rantanen camp, okay, these guys are serious, right? So maybe they've learned from that.
Well,
and now you have 4 months to close it.
Being serious, is the player.
Well, that's fair too. Yeah. Well, you don't know, right? But even the new team that acquires him, like, obviously having success and getting comfortable, it's hard to get comfortable in 3 weeks in a new environment. But it is a
Maybe
risk,
pass
man.
on
Like you're like, think about now, they didn't give up as many high-end prospects for Gensel for sure, but they gave up some pretty good players to get Rantanen. And if all of a sudden you just lose them and Rantanen plays the regular season and whatever you do in the playoffs, unless you win the cup, you probably look and say, man, that was a lot to give up just for that short of time. That's the balancing act.
I don't look at it that way though, because Natchez only had 1 year left on his deal. And at some point he was going to go from 6 to 9 million. And I don't know that the Hurricanes wanted to pay him that. So I think they were just preempting or getting ahead of they were ultimately going to end up losing that player anyway.
Potentially.
And they acquired Rantanen and Gensel without giving up a first round pick or any of their top 5 prospects. Like the fact that you were able to do that, it de-risks the situation a lot because your future hasn't been touched. I think you sacrificed a little bit of your presence losing Natchez, your present, but we also don't know that they're done yet on other moves. What if they decided to add something else before the deadline?
Well, yeah. Well, they might. That wouldn't be bad. They need it still. So we'll see. They're fascinating. What about the Devils? Where did you come out on them? And what did you make of Jack Hughes' performance at the Four Nations?
I thought it was dreadful.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more disappointing player for the U.S. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but Kyle Connor was scratched for the championship game. He shouldn't have been. Still an interesting choice. I'm not taking out a 60-plus point player in the NHL. If you're looking for one moment, one shot, one goal, Kyle Connor can be that guy for you. So not the decision I would have made. Not that counts for jack shit. But I thought Jack Hughes was exposed in a big way in Four Nations. He very rarely made something happen with the puck. He was easily bumped off of a ton of pucks. And when he did have it, he threw it away a lot. Threw it to empty space, dumped it in, whatever it might have been. It wasn't impressive. And I think the slight nature of Jack Hughes is what is holding him back. I don't know how much of that's mental and how much of that's physical, but it is abundantly apparent that that's not the type of game that he's suited to play.
Yeah, and he's relatively young player still. I think this is 6th season.
That doesn't count as young anymore.
No.
Like,
he'll take it in. To me, it's like he has played the playoffs
games in his NHL career.
Yeah.
Not young.
But best on best, man, like you're talking the best of the best. And I think there's 2 ways you go from that. You learn from it and say, okay, let's evaluate my game properly. What didn't I like? What are the areas I could improve on? And then we'll see, right? And but he'll have to be better for the New Jersey Devils in the postseason for sure if they want to go anywhere, because he's obviously their go-to guy. He's their leading scorer, and he'll play a lot. But yeah, it wasn't a great 4 games to put it politely for Jack Hughes. So if you're the Devils, though, like you heard Sheldon Keefe after last game, right? He didn't like the Hughes Nemec. Their defense still probably isn't where the coach wants them to be.
And I understand that. I think they need some help. I think if we're looking at the pecking order in the East, I think the Devils are they're much closer to the Red Wings and Senators than they are to the top teams.
Yes.
As they're currently constituted.
Yeah. And so let's get to the Washington Capitals come out of this break. They had nobody at the Four Nations and they absolutely mauled 2 teams, outscoring.
Maybe they were the biggest winner.
Yeah.
Hey, we got all of our guys rested and no one's hurt.
Yeah. Ovechkin comes out. That chase, Frank, and I've said it all year long. When it gets close, it just fires up your whole team. And the crowd and everybody, the anticipation now, he's within 13 goals, 12 to tie, 13 to break the record. And you know what? He can still wire the puck. His second, both his shots on, the first 2 goals were nice, but his second one was still an absolute laser beam. And you know what? That's something to look for. You look at the Caps. It's funny, as great as they are, I think there's one obvious need for that team, and it's third line. I could add 1 or 2 guys. And if you're the Capitals, I think you're like those players aren't going to cost you a boatload, you wouldn't think. And I got to expect they'll be aggressive, if not 1, if potentially 2 guys, because man, their team is deep. Their defense core, top to bottom, is pretty solid. Their goaltending obviously is very good. Like the Capitals, they're a really good team, man. They're going to be a tough out in the East.
I agree. I still think third line center would be a great fit. Like if the guy we talked about this, the guy I proposed was Scott Lawton. If you give up something, at least you get him for another year, and it's at a value $3 million. I mean, look at the deal that Nemestikov just signed in Winnipeg, 2 times $3 million. That's right in the Scott Lawton market range, I think. So makes sense to me. Don't know if he's going to be their target, but I think that's a pretty clear one. Other than that, if I'm the Caps and I like the way this has all come together, I don't know that I want to tweak a ton. I think
they need a third line center. I agree.
Yeah, but I'm saying other than that, I don't know if you want to go out and make a big splash. I don't know that you need to.
No. Now here's a name for you, Frank. Now he's always played above third line center. But what about Brock Nelson to Washington?
I just don't think they need to swing that big. Don't get into the arms race with Winnipeg or Minnesota or Toronto or whoever's in the mix to get him. You don't really have a place for him. He doesn't fit your future because of his age. Don't get into the bidding war and give up more than you need to swing higher.
Yeah, the reason I said it was because it would be a high-end third line center. There's no question about it. But they've got Andrew Mangiapane, who very quietly in limited minutes has produced quite well. He doesn't play a ton. He's starting to play more. And you know what? Now, I'm not saying he's a 35 goal scorer again, but I think he has enough offense to be a 20 to 25 goal man. And you put him with Brock Nelson, and Nelson's so reliable. He adds speed. You know, he's a veteran guy. Like, it's an easy room to come into, I would think, because they're playing so well. And you're just like, oh man, this is great. Like, he's a name. If I'm the Caps, that plus it takes him away from Toronto, as you mentioned, right? Like if you get him, you get him, but then one of your big rivals in the East doesn't. So there's value there too.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I also wonder about the Caps and the long term. Like, I'm not saying the Caps aren't a good team. Like, please don't mistake that at all. I think they are a good team, and I think the pieces
they got so many good picks coming.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So you don't really want to dip into your future pool, but do you look at some of the seasons that their team has had? Okay, let me just run through a couple of them. Dylan Strome, Protas, Dubois, Connor McMichael, Jacob Chikrin already has 17 goals. Is there any element to this Caps team that the Seattle Kraken had a few years ago when they answered? I don't think so. Not when they answered, but when they all had career years and then the next year fell apart. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but what I'm saying is how much of this year is repeatable.
Well, I just want to say I was on Team Dubois at the start. I thought he'd be a 60-point guy again. He's done it 3 times. Like, he's on pace to be in the 60s again. So it's not like
hold on a second. As good as you feel about that, how good do you feel about the consistency in his game? Okay, makes a statement this year. His career was on the ropes. I know that's funny to say for a guy with 7 years left on his deal, but career was on the ropes.
I think it's overrated. He had 1 year of 40 points, Frank. He had 60 the 2 years before that. It wasn't
just the points. It was the attitude, the play, all of it, the effort, compete.
I blame it more on the usage, for my opinion, and I think it's showing. He went 60 points 1 year, and now he's back to being a 60-point guy. So to me, the outlier is the 40 points. That's an obvious outlier.
But right? It's, again, not points. If it were all about points and it were all about just production, then he probably would have just stayed where he was.
Well, no, he didn't want to be in Winnipeg, and people took that like as a major slight. He was just like, hey.
He also didn't want to be in Columbus, and then wanted to get to LA, and then showed up and didn't do anything in LA. My only point is, how good would you feel making a bet that
I would bet no problem that Dubois for the next 3-4 years is a 60-point player, right around there. I'd have no problem with it.
Okay. But would you bet on all those other guys doing the same thing at the same time?
I actually think Protas, Frank, is just Protas is just he's just kind of starting to be. He is a massive human, and I've known Protas since he was in PA because I watched him that year as a 17-year-old when they won the WHL. He's so big and strong. He was incredibly skilled back then. He didn't have the strength to move his huge frame around all the time, and now he does, man. Like I'm telling you, I think Protas is going to be an absolute beast.
Tom Wilson has already hit a career high in goals.
Yeah, he might come down a bit in goals. No problem. I think Connor McMichael's a guy who's just starting to come into his own, right? Like
Connor McMichael is 10 points north of his previous career high. Dylan Strome is 9 points away from his career high. And we've got a third of the season left. I'm not believe me, when I'm asking these questions, I'm not throwing shade. I'm just saying they've got something cooking here. So there's two schools of thought. Either we latch onto that and we go out and take a massive swing and we help this team that's in the moment and in the zone while Ovi's still producing, or we keep our powder dry. We know we've got these prospects coming and we're just going to see how it unfolds from here.
Well, I think I don't think they have to give up any of their top prospects to get a third line center. That's the advantage, right? Like and I think we agree they only maybe need one piece. So if you had one piece without having to bear the cupboards, and I agree, like Ovi's the one guy that I would say, hey, I don't think he can score at a 55 goal, 56 goal pace again next year. Like that is the one where I would look and say, hey, he's not going to have the record to chase, although maybe he's going to chase 1,000, who knows? But I think there might be one where you slow down. But man, I like Protas. I like McMichael. Tom Wilson, he might not be this much of a goal scorer moving forward, but I think he's a 25 goal guy to 30. He might not be a 38 goal guy, which I think he's on pace for, but I like the Caps, man. And they got so many good young players coming that's their advantage. Like they've been able, they're one of the rare retools on the fly. Part of it got lucky due to LTIR. We can't overlook that. Right. But they've been able to, but they did it with some really good moves. No one, you outlined it, Frank. No one else gave Dylan Strome a chance. This guy loves the Capitals, and he's rewarding them. And I think when you feel wanted, there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, I agree. And Jacob Chikrin too. Look at the bargain price that they paid for Jacob Chikrin. I mean, now they got to figure out how to extend him.
Yeah, goals from defensemen are Goals from defensemen are the one thing that's okay. He's got 16 now? 17. Like that's okay. Can you do that consistently?
Oh yeah,
that's
he can.
Hard.
Yes, he can. He had 18. He had 18 in a 56 game season in 2021.
Wow. Yeah, he's fit in great there too. What's he going to want though on a contract?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. All of a sudden, that deal, not only are you in the 8s, but you might be touching 9 at that point production.
Yeah, and they're
I think you're probably starting with a 9, playing 21 minutes a night, and
maybe
could score 25 goals this year as a defenseman. Like that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and if he can stay healthy, he's pretty good. So I like it. Let's bring in
Tyler. Before Tyler comes in. You're the schedule man. When does Ovi break the record?
God, I have to look. I'm going to say, without even looking at their schedule, he's going to do it in March. I'm going to say, like they had I would double check during the break. Can't remember the team. There was 3 games I thought at the end of March, and one of them was them. And he'll do it at home. I just think he does it at home.
Well, the schedule sets up, if I'm not mistaken, really nicely for the end of March at home.
Yes. Yeah, I want to say it's the 28th, but
take a quick peek. So there's a California swing in the middle of March, 11, 12, or 11, 13, 15. I think that's too soon. But they have the Sabres at home on the 30th. They've got the Red Wings, Flyers, and Panthers at home. And then they go to Winnipeg and Minnesota for 2. So,
yeah, like it's crazy, man. Like I think the momentum is just going to build, and some people are going to hate it. And yeah, I get it. Some people don't want to see records broken, but I think it's going to be. I think I had the Philly game. That's even earlier. I thought the Philly game
earlier. Wow.
Yeah. So, well, he's going, man. You never know. Could be a. Do they have it? Well, ask Tyler. Does Bet365 have a date that you can pick the game yet to break the record?
Yes, they did a couple of weeks ago. I'll pull it up here and check right now. Regular season goal line mark. So Ovi's minus 155 to break it this season, which is crazy because about a month ago it was plus 200. But yes, they do have odds on the specific team that he will do it again. So who are your guys' picks?
I had the Flyers on the 20th.
So the Flyers are one of the bigger long shots, Greg's 70-1.
Ooh, I like it.
That's
All
crazy.
right.
Yeah, the favorite.
What's the favorite? Like, who's the favorite? I'm just
Well,
curious.
it's going to be teams that they play twice.
Yes.
The Red Wings. I'm just eyeballing it here.
Yeah, so they have those back-to-back games against Columbus to like 2 of their last 4 against the Blue Jackets. So the Blue Jackets are plus 450, and then
Carolina's got to be low odds.
Carolina's plus 500, and so are the Islanders. Those are the 3 sort of favorites.
Chicago.
Oh yeah, they're kind of right at the end there. The Hawks are 12-1, so they're pretty close. But that Philly one, Greg, if you think he can get hot, I mean 70-1 is about as good as you're gonna get.
I take it back though; it's not really set up for him to do it at home.
No, the Chicago game in early April is the one home game if you wanted to wait. Not that you can score on demand, although maybe he could.
They have 11 road games and 8 home games left.
Yeah. I looked at that March. Ovi is a streaky scorer, guys. He's rested coming off this break. And that's why I think like that hat trick against Edmonton, I think I could just see him. He's got Calgary and St. Louis. He can score 3 more goals this week. Easy.
Yeah. Totally could.
Do it.
Sharks.
Do you know how awesome it would be to go slide right out of trade deadline into Ovi watch?
Well, you're going to, I think, for sure.
I know. I'm just saying, like, so you go 4 nations, trade deadline, Ovi watch. It's like, can you draw up a better 6 weeks for NHL hockey?
No. They're pretty lucky there.
Yeah. All right. Buy or sell questions for our friends at Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. I'm going to go all goaltending on today's edition of Buy or Sell. I got a couple of Canadian teams I want to ask you about. First, the Kevin Lankinen extension kind of, at least to me, it seemed like it came out of nowhere, and it's a lot of term for a guy who is on a basically league minimum contract. But it raises the question about Thatcher Demko, who's back on IR. He's got 1 more year at $5 million. Then he's a UFA at the end of next season. Is Thatcher Demko a Canuck next season? Buy or sell on that, Frank?
Sell. That to me, that extension was the writing on the wall. And not for nothing, Lankinen's been good and good enough, and also got in 4 nations, supplanted UC Saros. Like, he's a good goalie. And I think they've determined that with where he's at in his career and where he's heading, he's a good enough facsimile compared to an injured Demko.
Yeah. Well, the key word there is injured, Frank. And if Demko can't stay healthy all year, I don't think his trade value is anything. So I'm going to say he starts next season on Vancouver, but doesn't finish it.
I think that's fair too. Who's going to want to take a $5 million goalie who hasn't proven he can stay healthy for more than, a month or 2 at a time? Next one, let's stick in Western Canada. Oilers goaltending, a big topic from the weekend as they lost twice. Oilers get a goalie ahead of the deadline. Greg's, you buying or selling on that?
Oh, I'll sell. I think their GM came out publicly and said it numerous times. I don't see them doing it, but the really only option I could see is John Gibson. That's really the only one.
And John Gibson making what he makes, I'd give it a 0.0% chance. Yeah. No chance. The Oilers, I think, only have room for 1 deal. That's it. 1 trade. And I did tape a podcast with Stan Bowman on Friday. Look for Frankly Speaking dropping on Wednesday. And he said, and I even went back and asked a further question and said, just for clarity, there seems to be some thought out there that you might go get a goalie during the trade deadline. And he said no.
All right. Next one I got for you then. Let's just take a bigger scope or a bigger look at the goaltending market. I'll set the line at 1.5 goalies getting traded. Over 1.5 goalies getting moved at the deadline. And we're talking only NHL caliber. A 3rd goalie getting moved in the American League. Like, that doesn't count. Over 1.5 NHL caliber goalies get traded at the deadline, Frank.
Under. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 0.
Oh.
Tell me who needs a goalie. Like, seriously, just go through all 32 teams and tell me who's going out to trade for one.
I mean, I think Carolina would be smart to get some insurance.
Okay, that's one. Can you get to two? I think you just defeated your own over-under. The proper line would be a half.
Yeah, maybe. I still think Edmonton, I'll maybe disagree a little bit there. I think Edmonton should look at something, but maybe the market's just not there. Greg's 1.5. You going with the under 2?
Yeah, I know. I'll go under. I didn't like the only major wild card would be if some team or GM is like, hey, Jordan Binnington in big games, maybe we got to go for him. But he's got term and he's got a big ticket. So I don't think so, but he's my only out of the box wild card. Because I agree with Frank, there's not a ton of teams. If Edmonton says they don't want one, I don't see a lot of teams. Carolina, I agree, could maybe, but even then, they're probably like, yeah, but if Freddie's healthy, there's no one better than him.
That's how they feel, I think, is if Freddie's healthy, we're good.
Yeah. I would just rest him. I'd play him every
so he had the blood clot and then had a knee injury. And they were like, well, the knee injury, that's like, we know what that is like. He's back from it. So unless there's some freaky unknown blood clot thing happening again, like we'll just roll the dice.
Yeah.
And by the way, Tkachuk has played a bunch of playoff games already now.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm sure they wouldn't want to get rid of him. All right, there you go, boys. 3 questions on the goaltending market. Good to be back and talking trades. That's a wrap on this week's edition of Buy or Sell.
We're going to look more at the West on Thursday's pod. We're kind of, for people out there wondering, we'll get to the West teams then. But we haven't talked about the Maple Leafs, Frank, and Tampa Bay. What do you see either doing anything? Toronto, I think it's obvious they'd like to get a center. I think that's kind of obvious. But Tampa Bay, anything there?
Well, Tampa was one of the teams that was in on Brandon Saad. So I think that gives you some indication that they're looking for some scoring help on the wing. I think my big question with Tampa, though, is how big of a swing are they going to take? Because on one hand, they're only 4 points back of the Leafs for the division lead. They've won 5 in a row.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they haven't had any deep playoff runs the last couple years.
Yes.
Are they ripe to do it again?
They don't have. They've already traded their first and their third. They have 2 seconds. They have I think they have 4 or 5 sevenths. Funny enough, but yeah, I'm with you. At some point, maybe you say, hey, we think we're competitive. We like our team enough that we can win a round or 2. Florida isn't the juggernaut I think that they were last year. I think that's fair to say.
I would say the East as a whole is wide open.
Yeah. And Kucherov gets hot, man. Kucherov and Braden Point, if you look in that division, you can make the argument that as a duo, they're the best forward duo in the division.
I'm way more interested in what do the Red Wings do.
Well,
they got to get in.
Yeah, they have to get in. Did you see their weekend? It was no shortage of entertainment, right? They blow the lead against Detroit. Against Minnesota. Then they have a 3-goal lead against Anaheim. They allowed goals in the last 3 minutes of the game. 3 of them? Now they won. They came back and won against the Ducks. They lost against Minnesota. I still think they're going to want to, knowing Todd McClellan, Trent Yanni, they'd love to get a veteran defenseman to shore up, right? Just somebody they're going to say, hey, he might not play big minutes for us, Frank, but he can play in the final minute of a game, knowing that he'll just make the smart play.
It's going to be fascinating. I think they've got to make some moves to ensure that they get in. They cannot miss this year.
Them, Columbus, and Ottawa. We didn't touch on the Sens. What do you make of the Sens, and how long you think Brady Tkachuk's out?
I think the Sens are good. I think Brady Tkachuk misses, 7 to 10 days in that ballpark. Not going to be incredibly long. I think the bigger question is Ullmark.
No.
And not just the health, but the play. And how much has the play been impacted by the health? Their season has been a bit of a roller coaster, and you can almost tie it directly to save percentage. When Ullmark was unbelievable, they were on a total hot streak. They survived without him and hung in the race, which is a true credit to them. I think they could use a couple different upgrades. I think they could use a defenseman and a forward. Is there a team out there that they could kill two birds with one stone in one deal.
D-man and a forward, yeah. Well, the other thing, really, we talk about Tkachuk, but their injuries down the middle with Pinto and Norris. That, how long-term are they? That, to me, is the bigger issue in Ottawa. Is they might have to get a stopgap centerman, because I think they're in the same boat as Detroit. They want to get in. They're this close, right? We saw what Brady Tkachuk did at Four Nations. I would argue he is the Americans' best. Well, he definitely was their best forward in the final. And he was so impactful. The thing I liked about Brady's game was he played right on that edge, Frank, and he didn't cross it. And that's such a great learning thing for him. I thought he was fantastic.
If you're the Sens, you are drooling about the idea of getting in and having a chance to harness that in the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's the type of piece that you long for. And if you're the fact that we're 6 or 7 years into the Brady Tkachuk experience in Ottawa and he hasn't gotten a taste of that yet or to show that yet, just shows how disappointing it's been.
And then what about Sanderson? There's another guy who
he
came
stepped right in and he was excellent.
Great. Yes.
I thought that's a great experience for him, not just to take back to the Sens, but also for the 2026 Olympics. There's no way Sanderson's not making that team.
Oh, his skating, his mobility. We haven't talked about him a lot, but what were your thoughts on Adam Fox in that tournament?
Not good.
No.
The fact that he got one turn on PP1 before making the change, without Quinn Hughes, he had to be your quarterback on the power play. And once he wasn't, his utility was marginalized in a significant way. And I'd be real surprised if he made the Olympic team in 2026, based on what we saw. Unless there's something that changes, health-wise to someone else. I think you take him and you replace him with someone else that brings you a different game.
The other guy we forgot for the Sens, because he got a lot of experience, Frank, was that Nicholas Mantampalo, right? The young D-man who got in for Finland. That, you know what? There's a guy who, he played in their game coming out of this break, and they were looking for a D-man. Maybe
he played 18 total career NHL games or games this season prior to Four Nations. He gets in. He looks good, and he was a guy that, quite frankly, I had to Google when they added him to the roster. Hey, am I spelling this right? But he supplants Juuso Välimäki for Finland, and then Välimäki comes back to Utah and gets put on waivers. Tough run if you're Välimäki, getting scratched for a basically no name, new name NHLer, and then get put on waivers.
You think he gets claimed?
I do not with the extra year on his deal.
Yeah. That extra. Yeah. That's why, because people are why didn't they trade for him? I'm well, I think it's the extra year, right? If he was they probably could have facilitated a trade with somebody just to get a pick, but not with that extra year. So I would agree. What about the Rangers? Because you know what, kind of what we see is what we get. That coming out of the break, they didn't look great.
No, they kind of turned back the clock to December, didn't they? Which is not a good feel if you're Chris Drury and that group thinking that they can blast off again. I think they kind of are what they are, as disappointing as that is. But as funny as it is to say that, they're still only 2 points back.
No, I know that they're still in it. But do you think they add anything?
I think they need to do whatever they can to set their core for next year. And if that means getting ahead of some of it now, instead of waiting until the summer, if you can pull off a big deal for K'Andre Miller, or if you can get something interesting for Ryan Lindgren, or whatever it might be, they've done some of that work already, obviously moving Trouba and Kakko and those guys out, Hedl to get Miller. There's been a lot of that work already, but I think if they could just move a few more pieces around and leave less heavy lifting to the summer, they'd be in good shape, even if it means missing this year.
And the last team we kind of think that's in the hunt we haven't talked about, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Don Waddell a few weeks ago said, hey, I feel like I owe it to my group to add. They did get Boone Jenner back, right? So there's an internal addition.
And Eric Goodbranson is on the way back too, skating for the first time since October.
And Werenski just picks up right where he left off. He led the Four Nations in
points.
What
a tournament he had, by the way. Tyler and I sat next to each other for the games in Boston. And there was a couple times in that final where we looked at each other like, whoa, if that went in, Zach Werenski's the MVP of the tournament.
Dude, Zach Werenski, I still say it. I mean, he's the Norris front runner. And I've been saying it for a few months. He has had such a remarkable season for Columbus.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
But what does Columbus do? I would call them a soft buyer.
Yes. I think they add something just to kind of, tell your team, all right, hey, they believe in us. It's another small thing. Away we go. We're not subtracting.
Can't believe the injuries that they've had this year.
Oh, decimated by injury.
I mean, like, to go through what they've been through, to then have so many vets knocked out of the lineup, and then the latest with Marchenko and like, it just, I can't believe Cole Sillinger. Like, it's unbelievable what they've gone through. Monahan.
Oh, well, you look at, and they just have lots of guys.
Kevin LeBanc is out. Like, I mean, he's done for the year. Like, it's just, it never ends.
No. But I think getting Boone Jenner back, man, like he played almost 17 minutes in his first game back. So there's a guy that, you can plug in and he can play a lot of minutes and gets guys in better categories. But the Marchenko one, when he was out for a bit, like he's been great for them. So Columbus is, I'll be honest, Columbus is a team from afar that you just root for. Everything that's gone on from losing Johnny Gaudreau and everything else. It's a great story. But there's Detroit, there's Ottawa, there's Columbus. One of them is going to have to miss, I guess, unless there's a shock and one of the top 6 teams suddenly plummet down the standings, right? And then there's the Rangers and, Boston. Like the race in the East, man, is fascinating to me. There's 5 teams, and right now it looks like probably only 2 spots.
Yeah, and through all of that, even though given what I just said, I'm still not ready to count out the Rangers.
No, you can't count them out. I totally agree. Yeah, they're one of the 5.
Like, this is the way it's going to work. You're one good week away from being in the driver's seat for any of those 5 teams.
Yeah, or maybe one bad week from suddenly being out of it, right?
Yeah. Well,
Islanders are selling. Are they not? They got to be.
They have to. I've said it. I can't say it any more times. Anything less than selling is malfeasance.
Yes, it would be. Islander fans, you have to look at it and be like, hey, we got to get a rebuild. You can't just keep
this run that they went on was the tease of all teases.
Yeah. And they've lost 3 since, right? So yeah, like if they don't, then they got to make a change in management in the offseason because they're obviously not seeing what's reality because they're not competitive right now enough. They're competitive enough to be in the ugly middle where you don't get a top 10 pick and you don't make the playoffs. And that's not where you want to be. So great pod. We'll be back Thursday. We'll talk more about the Western Conference teams and some injury updates and more. That's the rundown brought to you by Bet365.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.